During a family gathering, my sister posted a video with the caption, "Teaching my kids what generosity means, something many parents forget to do." In the video, her kids were shown giving away used toys to less fortunate children. Those less fortunate children were my kids. I didn't say a word. I just packed our things, put my kids in the car, and left without looking back. The next day, I canceled the family spring break trip, the one I had organized myself, worth over $6,000. That night, I lay awake replaying the video again and again. It had already been shared dozens of times. The comments were full of people praising Madison for raising compassionate kids and spreading positivity. Someone even called her an inspiration. Every word made me feel smaller, like I'd been shoved into a role I never agreed to. The struggling single mom who should be grateful for her sister's charity. By morning, something in me snapped. For weeks, I'd been the one planning our big family spring break trip to Florida. I'd spent hours finding the right Airbnb, coordinating flights, organizing car rentals, all to make sure everyone had a great time. Madison had barely lifted a finger, as usual. I opened the group chat and typed a short message. Trip canceled. Refunds processed. Everyone can make their own plans. No explanation. No apology. Within minutes, the notifications started flooding in. My mother called. My brother texted question marks. Madison sent a long voice message, demanding to know why I was being dramatic. I didn't respond to any of them. I just looked at the last text from her, where she'd written, "It was just a fun video. Don't make this bigger than it is." But it was bigger than a video. It was about how easily she used people, even her own family, to feed whatever image she was trying to project online, and I wasn't going to be part of that anymore. By Monday morning, my phone was still buzzing nonstop. My mom had called 3 times, my dad once, and Madison had left a string of messages that started polite and ended passive-aggressive. I didn't open any of them. I dropped the kids off at school, came home, and finally let myself cry. Not out of sadness, out of sheer exhaustion. For years I had played along. Madison was the perfect one, the one with the immaculate house, the camera-ready kids, the husband who showed up to family dinners in pressed shirts. I was the one still juggling bills, working extra shifts, and showing up with messy hair because life didn't stop long enough for me to fix it. I'd learned to take her small jabs, the ones that came disguised as jokes, like when she'd say, "It must be hard raising them alone," with that pitying tone that made me want to disappear, or when she'd insist on paying for things just this once, and then remind me later how generous she was. But this video had crossed a line. She'd humiliated my kids, used them to play out some narrative about her being a saint. That afternoon, my mom showed up at my door without warning. She didn't even knock, just walked in holding a casserole dish like it was a peace offering. She said she wanted to talk. I let her sit at the table. She started by saying Madison hadn't meant any harm, that the video was just a misunderstanding. She even tried to laugh, saying Madison could have worded it better. I stayed quiet. Then my mom asked if I'd reconsider the trip, said everyone was looking forward to it, that canceling had hurt the family. That was the moment I realized no one had even asked why I'd done it. They just wanted things back to normal, back to me swallowing my pride and fixing everything. I told her the trip wasn't happening. I said I was tired of pretending we were all close when, deep down, it was just Madison pulling the strings and the rest of us pretending not to see it. Mom didn't take it well. She said family was family, that I shouldn't air dirty laundry, but I hadn't aired anything. Madison had, to hundreds of strangers online. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. I thought about deleting social media altogether, but part of me wanted to see if Madison would take the video down. She didn't. Instead, she doubled down. 2 days later, she posted another clip, this time talking to the camera about how sometimes people misunderstand your intentions when all you're trying to do is good. The comments were full of sympathy. "Ignore the negativity," someone wrote. "You're doing amazing, Mama." I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. That night, Noah came into my room. He asked why Aunt Madison said we were less fortunate. He said some kids at school had mentioned the video. My chest tightened. I didn't even know they'd seen it. I told him that sometimes adults do things to look good, even when they hurt other people. He looked confused but nodded slowly. Then he asked if we were poor. I wanted to say no, to make it sound simple, but the truth was complicated. We weren't rich, but we were fine. We had enough. What hurt wasn't the money. It was being turned into someone's charity project. After he went to bed, I made a decision. If Madison wanted to tell stories online, fine, but I wasn't going to let her write ours. The The next morning, I drafted a short post. I didn't mention her by name. I didn't need to. I just wrote, "Sometimes the people who talk the loudest about generosity are the ones who humiliate others in the name of it. Not everything kind needs to be filmed." I hit post, then turned off my phone. It took less than an hour before it blew up. By lunchtime, my post had more likes and comments than anything I'd ever shared before. Most were from friends or coworkers, people who'd never met Madison but knew me well enough to read between the lines. Some wrote things like, "Good for you." Others simply said they understood. It wasn't meant to go viral, but it spread fast. My cousin texted asking if I was talking about the video. A neighbor sent a message saying she'd seen both posts and couldn't believe Madison had done that. By the time I picked up the kids from school, I already knew Madison had seen it. She hadn't called me, but she'd made another post. This time a long paragraph about toxic people who twist everything into drama. The photo attached was of her smiling with her daughters in a park, captioned, "We choose peace." It almost made me laugh. The hypocrisy of it. How she managed to turn even her guilt into another performance. When I got home, there was a voicemail from my dad. His voice was calm but disappointed, the way it always was when he wanted me to back down. He said he didn't want this social media war to continue and that I should call my sister and apologize, to smooth things over. I deleted the message without finishing it. That night, as I tucked Ellie in, she asked if we were still going on the trip. When I said no, her little face fell. She said she'd really wanted to go to the beach. My throat tightened. I told her we'd go somewhere else, just the three of us, somewhere quieter, somewhere that didn't feel fake. After she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed scrolling through old photos. Birthdays, holidays, Christmas mornings where Madison and I were still pretending to be close. I tried to remember when it all started to sour, when her need to be admired began to matter more than being kind. Maybe it was after she got married. Maybe it was when her online followers started growing. Or maybe she'd always been that way, and I'd just been too busy surviving to notice. The next morning, I went to work like usual. Around noon, one of my coworkers, Janet, pulled me aside. She said she'd seen the posts and wanted me to know she admired how I handled it. She said she'd gone through something similar with her sister. Different circumstances, same pattern. People who hurt others, then call themselves the victims when you finally stand up. Her words hit me harder than I expected, because that's exactly what Madison was doing. When I got home, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a handwritten note from Madison. It said, "You really embarrassed me. You could have called me instead of posting cryptic things online. Mom is devastated. You're tearing the family apart over nothing. Please delete your post and grow up." No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just guilt and blame. I sat at the table for a long time holding that note. I thought about calling her, not to fight, but to finally tell her how much it hurt. But I knew how that conversation would go. She'd cry, twist the story, make me question myself. She was good at that, too good. Instead, I took a deep breath and grabbed my laptop. I started searching for last-minute spring break destinations within driving distance. Small beach towns, cabins by the lake, places where my kids could laugh without feeling like someone might film them for likes. I found a modest rental by the water in North Carolina. It wasn't fancy, but it looked peaceful. I booked it. That night, when Noah asked if we were still going anywhere for break, I showed him the photos. He smiled for the first time in days. And for the first time, I felt like I'd done something right, not just for me, but for them. Still, a small part of me couldn't help wondering how far Madison would go to defend her image. Because if there was one thing I'd learned about her, it was that she never liked losing control of the narrative. 2 days later, the calm I'd been trying to build cracked again. It started with a message from my aunt. A screenshot, actually. Madison had gone live on Facebook. The caption read, "When family betrays you publicly." I didn't want to watch it, but curiosity got the better of me. She sat in her perfectly staged living room, the kind that always looked like a magazine cover. White walls, matching pillows, her daughters playing quietly in the background. Her voice was soft at first, trembling just enough to sound sincere. She said that she'd done a good thing that had been twisted by someone close to her. She said she was heartbroken that people can't see past jealousy. Then she smiled that small, practiced smile she always used when she wanted to seem gracious. She never said my name, but she didn't have to. Every detail made it clear who she meant. I watched the comments roll in. Hearts, prayers, people saying, "Stay strong," strangers calling her a true example of grace under fire. One even wrote, "Your sister sounds bitter. Keep shining." I closed the app before I threw my phone. That night, when my mom called again, I didn't pick up. She texted instead saying, "Honey, I think it's time to make peace. This has gone too far." too far. As if I was the one broadcasting private pain to hundreds of people, as if being humiliated publicly wasn't too far already. The next morning, I decided not to respond to any of them anymore. Silence, I realized, was its own kind of power. Madison could keep talking, but without my reaction, her story would eventually collapse under its own weight. At least, that's what I told myself. By Friday, my coworker Janet mentioned something that made my stomach twist. Madison's video had reached a local community group online. She'd become some kind of suburban martyr. People I barely knew were messaging me vague things like, "Hope you're okay," and "Ignore the haters." I hated that. I hated being pitied. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want her apology anymore. I just wanted peace. A clean break. So I wrote one last message to the family group chat. "I love you all, but I need space. Please stop asking me to fix things I didn't break. Madison's choices are hers and mine are mine. I won't discuss this anymore." Then I left the group. Almost instantly, my phone vibrated. Texts, missed calls, notifications. I turned it off. The next morning, I packed the car for our trip. Noah helped me with the cooler while Ellie gathered her stuffed animals. The air felt lighter somehow. We drove for hours with music playing and the windows cracked just enough to let in the breeze. When we finally reached the small rental cottage, it felt like another world, quiet, with the ocean just a short walk away. The kids ran down the sandy path before I even had the chance to unpack. For the first time in months, I could breathe. That night, as we watched the sunset from the porch, Ellie leaned against me and said she liked this beach better than the one we'd planned with everyone else. Noah nodded, saying it felt ours. I smiled even though my chest ached, because it was true. This was ours. Still, as I checked my phone one last time before bed, I noticed a new notification, a message request from an unfamiliar name. It read, "I saw your sister's video. I think you should know something about her." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. The first line made my blood run cold. The message came from a woman named Claire Donovan. Her profile picture showed a tired smile and two young boys. I didn't recognize her name, but she mentioned that she lived in Madison's neighborhood. Her first line read, "I don't want to start drama, but I think you deserve to know what's really going on." She said Madison had been filming at the local community center a few weeks before, donating clothes and food on behalf of struggling families. Apparently, she'd mentioned my name to the volunteers, saying she was helping her sister who had fallen on hard times. Claire worked there part-time and remembered it clearly because Madison had brought a camera crew. She said it wasn't just a phone. It was a full setup, lights, a tripod, even a small mic clipped to her dress. She'd introduced herself as a local advocate for families in need. My hands shook as I read every word. Madison had told everyone I was struggling, that my kids didn't have proper toys, that she was supporting us quietly, except she'd filmed it all. Claire ended the message with, "I didn't believe her story. Something about it felt off. When I saw your post, I realized I was right. I thought you should know." For a few minutes, I just sat there staring at the screen. It wasn't anger this time. It was disbelief, a kind of dull, cold shock that made it hard to think straight. She hadn't just embarrassed me. She'd built an entire narrative about my life, one I never consented to. I walked outside to the porch, needing air. The sound of the waves was faint, but steady. The kids were already asleep inside, their laughter from earlier still echoing in my mind. I felt this weird mix of rage and heartbreak. All those family dinners where Madison insisted on paying for things to help me out. All those moments where she'd make little comments about how hard it must be to raise kids alone. I thought she was just being patronizing. I never imagined she was documenting it. I replied to Claire thanking her for reaching out. She said she had screenshots from the center's Facebook page, posts Madison had tagged herself in before deleting them later. She sent them over. There she was, Madison, smiling next to a table of donated toys. The caption said, "Helping families in our community, starting with my own." I felt sick. For years, I'd defended her. I'd told myself she didn't mean to hurt me, that she was just self-absorbed, not malicious. But now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table, watching Noah and Ellie eat cereal, chatting about collecting seashells later. I couldn't bring myself to tell them anything. They didn't need to know their aunt had turned us into her charity project. Not yet. But I knew one thing. I couldn't just let this slide. I thought about posting the screenshots, exposing her publicly the way she'd exposed me, but that felt like sinking to her level, and I didn't want my kids to see that side of me. Instead, I decided to go back to the source, the community center. I called the number Claire had given me and asked for the director. When I told her who I was, she hesitated for a moment, then sighed. She said she remembered Madison clearly, that she'd filmed the donation event without proper permission, and that some volunteers had felt uncomfortable afterward. I asked if she could send me an official statement confirming it. She said she could, and that she'd been meaning to reach out herself because Madison had promised to sponsor another event, but had stopped responding. By noon, I had an email. Proof that Madison had used the center's name and mine for her social media content. I didn't post it anywhere. Not yet. I just kept it. That evening, I sat on the porch again, watching the kids chase crabs with flashlights near the water. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. Madison had always controlled the story. But now, for once, I had the truth, and I had no intention of staying quiet anymore. I drove home from the beach 3 days later with a calm that didn't feel real. The kids sang along to the radio in the back seat, and I forced myself to smile, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Replaying that email, those screenshots, the way Madison had rewritten my life for her audience. As soon as we got home, I tucked the kids into bed and opened my laptop. I reread the message from the community center director twice, making sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing. It was clear. Madison had lied, used my name, and filmed other people's donations for attention. For years, she'd called it raising awareness. Now I could see it for what it was. Manipulation dressed up as generosity. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen new notifications. Madison had posted again. This time, she was crying in the video. Actual tears. She talked about how someone in her family was spreading lies and how she refused to engage in hate. She said she believed in forgiveness, even when others tried to destroy her reputation. Her followers flooded the comments with sympathy. Someone wrote, "You don't owe toxic people explanations." Another said, "Let karma handle them." It would have been easy to fire back, to post the screenshots, the email, the truth, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted her to see what silence really felt like, the kind that doesn't mean surrender, but control. Around noon, my mom called again. I almost didn't answer, but I couldn't avoid her forever. She jumped right in, her tone sharper this time. She said Madison was breaking down because of me, that people in church had seen the posts and were asking questions. She said I needed to call Madison and fix it. I told her that fixing it would mean lying, again, and that I was done protecting Madison's image at the expense of my own dignity. Mom went quiet for a second, then said, "You've always been jealous of her, haven't you?" That one hit hard. Not because it was true, but because it showed exactly how blind she was to what Madison had become. I hung up without another word. Then I sat at the kitchen counter, shaking, part fury, part relief. I realized that my mother would never understand. She needed everything to look perfect, even if it was rotten underneath. Madison had inherited that same instinct. Later that day, I got another message from Claire. She said the local paper was running a short feature on the community center's donation drives and had asked if she knew how to reach the woman from the video. Claire had told them the truth, that Madison didn't actually organize the donations. She just filmed them. That night, the article went online. It wasn't huge, just a small piece buried in the community section, but it mentioned Madison's name and clarified that her involvement had been misrepresented on social media. I didn't share it. I didn't need to. People started tagging her anyway. By morning, her page was flooded with confused comments, some polite, some angry. A few asked if she'd really lied about helping families. She didn't respond to any of them. She just turned off comments entirely. A small, almost guilty satisfaction bloomed in me, not because she'd been exposed, but because, for once, she couldn't twist the story. That evening, I got a single text from her. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You've ruined everything. No apology, no acknowledgement, just blame." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "No, Madison, I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped covering for you." Then I blocked her number. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight coming through the blinds, the kids laughing in the living room. It felt quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't suffocate. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. But even then, deep down, I knew Madison wouldn't disappear that easily. She needed an audience too badly, and people like her always found a way back into the spotlight, even if it meant burning someone else to get there. For a few weeks, things actually felt normal again. I took the kids to school, focused on work, even started jogging in the mornings. I didn't check Madison's page, didn't ask about her, didn't bring her up when my parents called, but the silence around her felt strange, unnatural. Madison was the kind of person who couldn't survive without being seen. When she wasn't posting, it usually meant she was planning her comeback. It came one Thursday morning, in the form of an email. The subject line read, "Statement from M. Lane." I didn't recognize the sender at first. It was her PR manager. Madison had apparently hired one. The email was polished and full of vague wording about miscommunication, false narratives, and how she'd temporarily stepped back from social media to focus on family. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. Anyone who'd followed the drama could read between the lines. She'd turned herself into the victim again. I could have ignored it, but then I saw the last line. Madison looks forward to continuing her community work with the generous support of her followers. I laughed out loud, a short, bitter sound. It was all an act, and somehow she was still getting away with it. That weekend, my parents invited me and the kids over for Sunday dinner. They said they just wanted a family reset. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Part of me hoped Madison wouldn't show up. Of course she did. When I walked into the house, she was already there, perfectly dressed, smiling like nothing had ever happened. My mom acted like it was a normal day, bustling between the kitchen and dining room, pretending the air wasn't thick with tension. Madison barely looked at me at first. She spent most of dinner talking about a new project she was launching, a mentorship program for young mothers finding their purpose. I nearly choked on my drink. She didn't even flinch when she said it. At one point, my dad tried to change the subject, asking if I was still taking the kids to North Carolina this summer. Madison looked up, all wide-eyed innocence, and said she was planning a similar trip. Maybe she'd bring her camera this time. That was it for me. I pushed my chair back slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. I told her that what she was doing wasn't kindness. It was exploitation. That turning people's struggles into props didn't make her compassionate. It made her manipulative. She didn't even blink. She just said calmly, "You've always been so angry, Hannah. I'm sorry you can't be happy for me." I didn't reply. I grabbed my bag, told my kids we were leaving, and walked out. My mom followed me to the driveway, saying I was overreacting, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I got home, I sat in the car long after the kids had gone inside. My hands were trembling again. Not from sadness this time, but from the realization that Madison would never change. She wasn't just thoughtless. She was addicted to being admired. And I wasn't going to play the supporting role anymore. The next day, I finally did what I'd been avoiding for weeks. I wrote everything down, not for revenge, not for an audience, but for myself. Every lie, every post, every time she'd used us to build her image. When I finished, it was almost midnight. The document was 12 pages long. I saved it, closed the laptop, and stared at the dark window. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet. But for the first time, I felt like I had control, like the truth was finally mine, even if no one else believed it. Then, just as I was about to turn off my phone, a notification appeared. A message from an unknown number. "Hey, Hannah. You don't know me, but I think I worked with your sister a few years ago. You might want to hear what she did at her old job." I froze. Because somehow, even when I thought the story was over, it wasn't. The message came from a woman named Lauren H. The tone was cautious, almost apologetic. She said she used to work with Madison at a marketing agency in Denver, before Madison left to focus on her brand. According to Lauren, Madison had a pattern, using people's stories to make herself look compassionate. At the office, she'd convinced a single dad coworker to let her feature him in a holiday kindness campaign. She'd promised it would help raise funds for him. Instead, she turned it into content for her portfolio. When he found out, he quit. Madison brushed it off as a misunderstanding. Lauren said she'd seen my name floating around online after the family video incident and had put the pieces together. "I'm telling you this because you're not crazy," she wrote. "She's done this before. You just had the courage to say no." Reading that made my throat tighten. It was both vindicating and deeply sad to realize how predictable Madison's behavior had become. I thanked Lauren for reaching out and promised I wouldn't mention her name to anyone. She said she didn't care. She just wanted Madison stopped before she hurt more people. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. My laptop was still open with that 12-page document on the screen. The more I read it, the less it felt like a journal, and the more it looked like evidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my kids in that video again, smiling awkwardly, not understanding why they were being filmed, and Madison behind the camera, smiling, saying she was teaching generosity. I realized I couldn't just sit on this anymore. Not for revenge, but because she'd keep doing it to someone else. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not for a lawsuit, at least not yet, just for advice. I wanted to know what my rights were regarding the use of my children's images without consent. The lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Avery, listened carefully, then told me something that made my stomach flip. Technically, what Madison did could fall under defamation by implication, especially since her video suggested my family was impoverished, and using the kids' faces for promotion without permission was another issue entirely. He said he could send a formal cease and desist letter demanding she remove all content featuring us and stop using our names. I agreed immediately. He drafted it that afternoon. When I read it over before signing, my hands trembled. It was firm, factual, almost cold, exactly what it needed to be. By the time Madison received it, she'd been silent online for over a week. I half expected an explosion, but instead, she sent a single text. "You actually got a lawyer? This is ridiculous." I didn't answer. 2 days later, every post, photo, and video that mentioned me or the kids disappeared from her page. Even her inspirational captions were gone. Then my mom called. Her voice was brittle, trembling with frustration. She said Madison was heartbroken and that I'd embarrassed the family by bringing in legal threats. I told her I wasn't protecting the family anymore. I was protecting my children. She didn't reply. For once, she just hung up. That night, I sat in the living room with Noah and Ellie, watching them draw pictures on the floor. I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Not because Madison had backed off, but because I'd finally drawn a line she couldn't cross. A week passed, then another. No messages, no posts, no drama. It felt almost too quiet. Until one evening, while checking my email, I saw a message from a news outlet, a small digital magazine that covered influencer culture. The subject line read, "We're investigating authenticity in online philanthropy. Would you be willing to speak off record?" And at the bottom, a line that made my pulse race. "We've already spoken with 2 other families your sister featured in past videos." I read the email 3 times before I could breathe properly. 2 other families. That meant this wasn't just about me anymore. The journalist, a woman named Rachel Hines, said she'd been investigating social media influencers who used acts of charity as marketing content. She didn't want to expose anyone unfairly. She wanted facts. She wrote that my sister's name had come up more than once and she'd found old videos that had been quietly deleted months ago. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the message, unsure if I was ready to reopen that wound. It had only been 2 weeks since the cease and desist. My life was finally calm. But part of me knew this wasn't over until people saw who Madison really was. I replied and asked to talk by phone, off record. Rachel called later that afternoon. Her voice was calm and professional, but gentle. She said she'd interviewed a single mother from Boulder who claimed Madison had filmed her kids receiving donated clothes the mother had bought herself, later realizing the entire scene had been staged for content. Another woman said Madison had filmed at her local food bank, pretending to volunteer, but only stayed long enough to get photos. Both stories sounded painfully familiar. Rachel asked if I was willing to confirm my experience. I told her yes, but only if my children's names were kept private. She promised they would be. After the call, I sat in my car outside the grocery store for nearly 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel. It was strange. I wasn't shaking from anger anymore. Just relief. Relief that someone else finally saw it. That night, as I tucked Ellie into bed, she asked if she could call Aunt Madison. I hesitated, then said, maybe later. She frowned and said she missed the way everyone used to laugh together at Grandma's house. I wanted to tell her that what she missed wasn't real, that most of that laughter had been performance. But I couldn't. She was too young for that kind of truth. The next morning, I sent Rachel the email from the community center director and screenshots of the deleted posts Claire had saved. She thanked me, said this would help bring accountability to a growing problem. 2 days later, the article went live. It wasn't sensational. It was measured, factual, and well-researched. The headline read, "When Kindness Turns into Content, How Social Media Erases Real Struggles." Madison's name appeared halfway through, alongside quotes from the families she'd misrepresented. The piece mentioned that she'd been asked for comment but declined. By noon, the article was everywhere. I didn't share it. I didn't have to. People did it for me. My phone filled with messages from co-workers, old friends, even a few people from our hometown saying they were sorry for ever doubting me. By evening, Madison's accounts went private. Every platform. No new posts. Just silence. That night, my dad called. Not to defend her for once, but to ask if I was okay. His voice was tired, like something in him had finally broken too. He said he'd seen the article, and that Mom was having a hard time processing it. I told him I understood. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. He said, "You did the right thing." And for the first time, I believed him. Still, I couldn't sleep that night. Even with the quiet victory, there was this hollow ache I couldn't shake. Because the truth didn't erase what she'd done, it just made it real. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Madison was standing there. No makeup, no phone in her hand, no performance-ready smile, just red eyes and a shaky breath. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You ruined me." Her voice cracked halfway through, and I realized she wasn't angry. She was terrified, but I wasn't sure if she was terrified of losing her reputation or of finally facing who she really was. I didn't move at first. She just stood there on the porch, hugging her own arms like she was cold, even though it was warm outside. I could see her car parked across the street. She'd come alone. No camera, no husband, no kids. I told her she could come in, mostly because I didn't want the neighbors watching. She stepped inside quietly, looking around like she expected judgment hanging in the air. For a moment, we just stood there in the kitchen, the same place where I'd once cried over her video, over the humiliation she'd turned into a trend. Finally, she said she didn't come to fight. She said she'd lost most of her sponsorships, that brands had paused collaborations after the article. Her voice trembled when she said her husband was angry, not for what she'd done, but for how it all looked. I asked her what she wanted from me. She hesitated, then said she needed me to tell people it had all been a misunderstanding, that she hadn't meant harm, that I knew her heart. For a moment, I just stared at her. She looked so small, not physically, but emotionally. The glossy confidence was gone, replaced by panic. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I told her I wasn't going to lie to protect her anymore, that I wasn't the one who ruined her career. She did that herself. She blinked fast like she couldn't process that answer. Then she said quietly, "You could have talked to me before the article." I laughed, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. I reminded her that I had talked to her. I'd told her she crossed a line. I'd begged her to stop using my kids. She'd ignored all of it. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered that she'd just been trying to build something for her family, that everything she'd done came from a good place. That's when I felt it. That deep exhaustion that comes from years of explaining pain to someone who only hears insult. I told her she didn't need to justify herself to me anymore. I was done trying to fix her, forgive her, or understand her. There was a long silence. She looked around my kitchen again. At the half-empty cereal boxes, the messy art projects on the table, the normalcy she'd never found interesting enough to show online. Then she said softly, almost to herself, "You always made real life look easy." It stung, because it wasn't easy, but maybe that was the point. She'd never seen anything that wasn't curated through a lens. When she finally left, she didn't slam the door or yell. She just walked to her car, shoulders slumped, like someone who'd finally realized the applause was gone for good. After she drove away, I stood there for a while, listening to the faint sound of her engine fading down the street. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just relief. That night, I deleted every saved message, every screenshot, every trace of her from my phone, not to erase what happened, but to let it stop living rent-free in my head. The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes for the kids. Noah asked if Aunt Madison was still in trouble. I said she just needed time to figure some things out. He nodded, satisfied with that. Ellie asked if we could visit Grandma soon. I said maybe, but not yet. We spent the rest of the day outside, drawing chalk rainbows on the driveway, our hands stained in color. It was quiet, simple, unrecorded, and somehow, that felt like the most precious thing I'd ever owned. A week later, I got one final email. It was from Madison. No subject line, no apology, just a single sentence. I finally deleted my accounts. I didn't reply. I just sat there for a long time, staring at the words. For the first time in years, she'd chosen silence, and that, I realized, was the closest thing to peace either of us would ever get.